Welcome back to the Mackem in the Middle podcast after another Sunderland League game, another home game that did also finish 0-0. Of course, Preston was the game on Saturday, which finished 0-0, and another goalless draw at home to Blackpool on Tuesday evening, which, of course, we'll get into everything that happened during the game, the team selections, player ratings, and a brief look ahead to Saturday's game, which is, of course, away to Swansea. But first and foremost, Michael, I put out on Twitter after the game, and I think people did take it the wrong way because I did say it was a god awful night of football, and people took that as kind of a dig at the performance, the way we set up, the performances of the players. It wasn't meant like that at all. It was just a reference to if you were watching the game as a neutral, really. You know, time wasting, which again we'll get onto. Another goalless draw. It wasn't the prettiest game of football.
No, it wasn't. I mean, looking at the performance just from our perspective, I thought first half we played all right, but you look at the second half, I think that Blackpool was certainly the better of the two teams, but I don't think either team did enough across the whole game to win. So in that sense, the game of football wasn't exactly great. I mean, if you look at the fact that the time wasting, I mean, we thought we'd left this behind in League One, but as it turns out, Blackpool second half, we're starting to even though I've just said I thought Blackpool were the better team, so I'm contradicting myself a bit, but Blackpool were trying to time waste a bit, and I think the fact that I mean, I'm not using the weather as an excuse, by the way, but the fact that the rain was coming down very hard in the second half meant that I think players couldn't get into their rhythm as much, and it meant that the game itself just degraded even more as a spectacle. So it was, yet again, it's going to be hard to try and really dissect a 0-0 draw too much, but yeah, it's not. You're right. It wasn't the best game of football by all accounts.
Yeah, and there's obviously going to be one topic that did come up a little bit about the Preston game, and it's definitely going to come up again for this game that happened against Blackpool. I'm sure you can guess what that is, and quite frankly, it usually comes up after we don't win a game, which I suppose is somewhat ironic. So before we get onto it, obviously we're not going to be blaming that for the result, but that is 2 points from two games at home against. I mean, that was a Blackpool team who I think had lost 4 of the last 5. And obviously a Preston team who are notoriously hard to score against, but incredibly easy to defend against usually. We kind of touched on it after the Preston game about, a result against Blackpool would kind of turn that point against Preston into a valuable point. Has a 0-0 draw against Blackpool as well somewhat taken that away?
Somewhat, yeah. I think we were right to hope for a bit more than 2 points from these games. I mean, I think I said on the Preston show that I think that a lot of people were underestimating Preston a little bit, and I could see that Preston at least are hard to score against. So there's not an excuse, but there's a factor into that result. Whereas this one, I felt Blackpool. I mean, I don't think Blackpool have been particularly great defensively. I think they have let in quite a few goals, and I think it's one of those where I'm more disappointed or a little bit annoyed at this result more than I am the Preston one. This was the game where I was thinking, okay, granted, it's not a given that we beat Blackpool, but it's one where really you need to be looking to win, really. I mean, again, you don't have a God-given right to beat anyone in this league. Christ, we've been told that enough times in League One. So, but yeah, this result is definitely more disappointing. I mean, I'm just looking now at the goals conceded column, and I think if you look at it in context, Preston have only let in 4 goals, whereas Blackpool have let in 16. Yeah. So, that's like joint with Borough. It's basically joint. It's joint with Borough, who are 22nd, more than Coventry, who are bottom.
I think, isn't it?
Sorry?
One of the worst in the league, bar
I think, Hull's the worst. I think Hull's the worst. I think Hull's let in 23 goals. But other than that, it's more or less 16s, 19s, 17s. Yeah. That's that sort of region. So, yeah, so it's definitely more disappointing not to have scored last night, in my opinion, as opposed to Preston. But you're right. I think with 2 points from those home games, while I'm relieved that we didn't lose either of those games, I think it is fair to have wanted and expected a little bit more.
Yeah. And obviously, it's probably a little bit harsh to say it's a bad result because at the end of the day, it's a clean sheet. It's another point on the board this early in the season. Obviously, there's other factors that play into it. The fact we still don't have any of our strikers, a couple of other players obviously missing through injury. But is this the first result of the season where you look at and say that's a bad result? And again, it's a little bad's probably a bit of a stretch because, like I say, a bad result.
I think disappointing result is probably. I think disappointing result's probably the phrase that I would use. I think it's. I think when you look at it, I'm always of the opinion that if you're not going to win games, then don't lose them. And I think right now, what I think we need to just do is that we need to at least make sure we don't lose games until Stewart and Sims come back. Now, how long that takes, I don't know. We can't afford just to go to every game playing for a point. I'm not saying that, but I think I've always said there's a difference between playing for a point and getting a point. I think there's a key difference there where at worst we make sure we don't lose the game, and then it gives us the platform to capitalize off that when the strikers do return, and providing they stay fit, obviously. But I think this result is I think this home result is probably the most disappointing one I've had since QPR. And obviously QPR was the manner in which that game panned out. Preston, you're kind of less surprised with their mean defence that it was a 0-0, but this one, yeah, I think this is the one I'm more, like I said, I'm more disappointed at this result than Preston, because I think Preston, despite the fact they don't score that many goals, I still think Preston are a better side than Blackpool. I think they've got better players. So yeah, it's not bad per se, but it's not particularly good either. I think it's at best probably a bang average one. I mean, Blackpool. I think Blackpool will be happier with that than we will be.
I think another fairly decent way to put it is that's probably the first result of the season that you would have expected anything else. You know, if you look at some of the other games we dropped points, and you look Borough, there'd have been quite a few people looking at that game and think, yeah, we take a draw. Obviously, we did end up losing that game. Preston, obviously, they've drawn so many games already this season, so quite a few people will have looked at that game and said, yeah, we might get a draw, we might snatch a win. But Blackpool was probably I want to say first game of the season that you look at and think we should win that game.
Yeah, the first one that we didn't win, I think the first one I looked at that was Rotherham, which thankfully we did win that game. But this game I viewed in a similar manner to the Rotherham game, whereas I'd have been disappointed with anything but 3 points. I would have been pretty outraged if we'd got beat, I must admit. So again, while it's not inspiring, it could have been worse. But you're right, this is definitely one where I looked at and thought, really, in the grand scheme of things, we could do with getting a victory here. And again, a draw isn't the end of the world. It's not like a disastrous result, but it's not a particularly good one.
Yeah. And obviously we touched on it again, kind of after the Preston game, and
we're going to refer back to the Preston show, aren't we?
Quite a lot, yeah. But it's always something that will come to light, especially after you don't win a game, and especially after you don't score a goal. Obviously, the fact that again we didn't have Sims, we didn't have Stewart, and I think that's the third game without Sims, and maybe the fifth or sixth without Stewart. And again, similar to that game on Saturday, you could sense that not having a natural centre forward on the pitch was a big reason why we didn't come away with 3 points and didn't really. Don't want to say we didn't look like scoring, because at times we did, but the main reason we didn't score is because how many times we've got into a decent position, and you put a ball into the box, Stewart is going to be there, Sims is going to be there. Whereas when we're playing without a centre forward, teams have somewhat figured out how we're going to play. They've limited the space that we can play in between, and obviously that's one thing that we've mentioned, the likes of Dan Neil, who obviously started on the bench, but Alex Pritchard, Patrick Roberts, and quite a few other players thrive in, and teams have kind of figured that out, and they've stopped giving us the space that we need to play. Not having that vocal point up front if things aren't going to plan is something that is starting to slowly creep in and somewhat affect results.
It is. I think one of the things that has affected us a bit more is the fact that Stewart, for example, Stewart or even Sims, both of them, especially when playing together, are two very, very good out balls. Stewart wins the flick on, wins the knockdown, and then Sims or Clark or Roberts, whoever else it is, could run forward and find much more space. So we're definitely missing that. And even against Watford, I said on that podcast that I've noticed it, that when we were clearing the ball in that game, there was no outlet to have the balls to stick to. So it meant that because the opposition have tall centre backs, seems like every bloody opposition has tall centre backs at the moment, but they keep coming back at us. It keeps coming back at us, and it means we're under pressure again. So they're definitely missing it in that regard. I think that last night showed that having a striker definitely. I mean, if you look at some of the chances we did create, I mean, especially against Preston as well, some of the chances you create, if you have a striker, they got on the end of some of those passes across the box, or have more of a killer's instinct. Although I do stand by that. I think not having a striker doesn't excuse Diallo when he had a very, very good opportunity. When he basically went down the right byline and could have had a shot, and he tried to take a man on, do it again, then lost the ball. And even more so, Jack Clark, I think right before half time, where he got into the box, turned his man, tried to beat him again, tried to beat him again, and then lost the ball instead of having a shot. Where at least if you have a shot, you're forcing the keeper into a save, and at best case scenario, you score. So, but again, that doesn't excuse the fact that those two chances don't excuse the fact that we did miss a forward.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that is very noticeable, probably more so against Blackpool than it has in any other game, is when you don't have that kind of, like, again, centre forward that will stay usually in the middle of the pitch and kind of, well, give the centre back something to think of. Is, I think you saw it especially in the second half later on when the likes of Juice and Bennett came on. You've got players who should be playing out wide, and are very effective at what they do when they are wide. They start drifting into the middle, because quite frankly, there's no one in that position naturally. And then you've got Bennett who'll drift inside. You've got no one on the left wing, and then it all kind of factors into the same thing of when you don't have the space to pass. And there was so many times throughout the game where, whether it was Michu when he came on the pitch, or Luke O'Nien trying to play out from the back, or whoever it was on the ball, looking forward, there just wasn't too many options on the ball.
No, there wasn't. And that's the problem. Like you said, that when you've had the likes of Stewart or Sims, both of whom were very, very good at, I mean, Stewart got about the pitch a lot, but both of them at least were predominantly in the opposition's final third for the majority of games, or more times than they weren't. So the fact that you're having players having to come back and come deep to receive the ball, so say Pritchard's having to come deep to receive it, Clark's having to come deep to receive it, Roberts is having to come deep to receive it, receive the ball. It means that by the time they've done that, the opposition have the chance to get back into shape again, and then it meant that our attack was a bit slower. It meant we couldn't get into our rhythm as much, and it meant that we were just generally getting quite frustrated. So, again, not to repeat myself too much, but yeah, that in that sense, in general play, definitely not having a forward, and especially you could argue that the effect of not having a forward seems even worse when you've had a striker like Ross Stewart who literally does basically everything. So not having that definitely affected us, but it's like I keep saying, the sooner that those two get back, the better. But ultimately, we just have to take more responsibility when we do try to go forward.
Yeah. Obviously, there was the one change. Ahmad came in for Dan Neil with, I think, Embleton kind of dropped back into that midfield role alongside Evans. And I think for large parts in the first half, especially, I don't think anyone would really question this, that Sunderland were the better team without looking too dangerous in the final third. Again, very similar to Saturday's game at home to Preston.
Yeah, I think that I'm trying to think of the way. I think our best spell of this game was better than our best spells against Preston, but I also think our worst spells of this game were worse than the spells against Preston. But we'll get on to the second half in a bit. As for the first half, yeah, I think that Ahmad Diallo and Jack Clark, as the two chances I alluded to earlier, should have, one of them at least should have been a goal, or at least at the very, very least a shot on target. But we were definitely the better side. I think you could tell that Blackpool were penning Blackpool in a little bit, and then I think it became apparent that we were starting to then, I don't know what the right word is, we couldn't get a rhythm going into the final third. We did well up until we got into the final third, and especially once we got into the penalty box. But once we did, we just seemed to turn into headless chickens more of the time because there either wasn't an option to aim for, or we just didn't quite know what to do when we got there.
Yeah.
Saying that though, like I said, Diallo had a chance, Clark had a chance. I think Embleton hit the bar as well in the first half. So
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
I would probably argue at the same time, to be balanced, that we were unlucky not to have taken the lead. But again, it keeps coming back to the same point. If a striker had been there, then I'm convinced we probably would have at least scored one or two goals in that first half had we played the way we did.
Yeah, and obviously, like we mentioned, there's a few chances, especially in the first half, but even in the second half, where we've kind of tried to walk the ball into the back of the net instead of having a shot. That Ahmad one is probably the one that people will look at the most, because I think that is the biggest chance of the game, really, in terms of being able to get a shot off. And from the position that he was in, if you get it on target, 9 times out of 10, you probably find the back of the net. And he's, as we've talked about when he signed, and in the little cameos that he has had, he's a player that does have the quality. He's shown it in different leagues and different competitions, and I think we've kind of spoke about it before, that he does look to be a little bit lacking confidence, I suppose, especially in the final third. In terms of that final decision on the ball, I think he's a very tidy player. He can receive it deep and drive us up the pitch, and I think that is something that will be very valuable this season. We've got a few players that can do that, but so many times, like we've mentioned, we just seemed almost afraid to shoot. Just wanted to keep recycling the ball. I think there was one point in the first half where we got the ball into their box, we came out the box, we passed it from left to right, back to left, back to the middle of the box, and just never got a shot off in that entire passage of play.
That's the problem as well. And because you're doing that, again, Blackpool were allowed to regain their shape again, which makes it even harder to break them down. than if he just had a shot. I mean, again, Diallo did it at least once against Preston, and then obviously that chance last night where he basically had space. He literally had space in the penalty box, near the 6-yard box, in fact. And if you take a shot, a goal, at least you force the keeper into a save. And I agree with you. I think there's a good chance he would have scored. I wonder with Diallo whether it's a case of once his first goal comes, he might get a few of them. So you're right. It very well could be down to a lack of confidence. But at the same time, I think Diallo will be most effective when you've got someone like Stewart who's operating the channels, and you're trying to get, and he's dragging defenders out of position because they're focusing on him, which could then suit Diallo quite a bit. I'm almost making it sound like Parkinson when he tried to use Wyke in the sort of false nine as well, not a false nine, but tried to use him in the physical 9 rule rather, and then have Maguire and Gooch operate either side and get chances. But point is, Stewart is that. I know we keep coming back to him again, but Stewart is that effective at doing that. But yeah, I mean Diallo, like I said, I like the look of him as well. I think he's a tidy footballer. I think there's something definitely about him, and I think he will have his uses throughout the season. I'm still glad we've signed him, but there's no getting away from the fact that the couple of times that he does tend to go forward, he seems to be a bit scared to pull the trigger, basically. And I do wonder whether his loan experience at Rangers is maybe affecting him a little bit. Maybe he had not had a great time there, I believe. So I don't know. But you're right. I think the lack of confidence especially when you get into a position where you can shoot and you don't shoot, looks pretty evident after a couple of games.
Yeah. Obviously, like we said, there was a few times, especially from open play, that we could have had a shot off and kind of carved a chance out from that, and could have been a different game had we taken them opportunities. But outside of that, set pieces as well. And obviously, there was one set piece in particular that happened during the game, which we'll get onto straight after this, which did cause a bit of discussion during the game and after the game, and probably for the rest of this week up until the Swansea game as well, to be fair. But from set pieces, free kicks especially, we had, I think, 3 very good positions from a free kick. And Alex Pritchard, we seen in League One last season that usually he's pretty good at free kicks, but every single one of them was absolutely just smashed straight in the wall and was cleared. And you'd think, from them positions, whether you try something different, you play it short, get a shot off, or go to the keeper's near side and test him that way. We just never tested the keeper really from them positions.
No, we didn't, did we? And I've got to be honest, I'm a big fan of Pritchard, but his set pieces have been dreadful. Recently, they've been from corners, from set pieces, from free kicks, wherever it is. They've been really, really poor. Either the crosses mishit, or the cross, as you said, or the shot from a free kick is atrocious. Like every single, I'm sure he is trying. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to try and slate the lad too much, but there's no getting away from the fact his set pieces have been abysmal, to say the least. Like you said, every one of them that we try to hit either hit the wall or went way over the bar. So it's just, I don't know. Maybe he's lacking a bit of confidence from having free kicks, or he's feeling the effects of not having a striker as much as anybody. But you're right, they were just dreadful. I do actually ask you this, right? Do you think that maybe there's a case to drop Pritchard at the moment? And in general, I like him as a player, but recently I don't think he's been particularly good.
I think it's the same with any player, though, isn't it? And I think people say this all the time: if a player's not performing, no matter who it is, you would tend to take them out of the team. And I think Pritchard, we
Yeah,
have quite a few players that not necessarily have the exact same quality as Pritchard, but play the same kind of role. And I think obviously Michu coming back from what was a slight injury when he signed, I think that'll possibly see him get a bit more game time, and Pritchard possibly drop out a little bit. We've got Embleton who can play the same role, and I think there's someone else who can play a very similar role that off the top of my head I can't actually think of. I think Roberts is kind of a wide version of Pritchard, to be fair. And I think if it's always a difficult one because Pritchard, if he was injured and you didn't have the selection to put him in the team, you'd think he was a miss. So I think it's one of them that
yeah,
he is important to the team. I think a lot of our play does actually come from him, whether he's coming to get it deep and get us up the pitch that way,
that
or
is true.
whether
To be fair, yeah,
he is in the final third and he's looking to thread that pass through to Ahmad or whoever's on the pitch at the time. But with other players like Michu, who obviously we'll get onto because he did come on and had a few touches here and there, and obviously it's his first game since he signed for the club, so I don't think there'll be too much criticism from him. But I think there's certainly players that could come in and play the similar role. Hard to say that.
yeah. Try and say that 5 times fast. Yeah, no, I mean, it was the general question was because I think Pritchard, I've seen him be better than what he's shown at the moment. That's not me saying drop him completely. I mean, just take him out for 1 or 2 games maybe. But I mean, to be fair, you're right. I mean, if you look at the second half at Bristol City in particular, I said on there that a lot of what we were doing in that game that got us the victory came through Pritchard. I mean, he assisted Sim's second goal in that game. He put some very good balls going forward. He was pretty much the architect of everything we were doing offensively. So I do think he's definitely got the quality. I just think some of his set pieces recently, I think, have been pretty woeful. If I'm like I said, if I'm honest, but I think he'll probably know that. I think he'll know for his own standards, of which I'm sure he has got them. For his own standards, I think he'll say that yes, they've not been good enough. But yeah, I mean, Michu, like I said, he came on and did okay. Didn't do anything particularly special, but wasn't. He was just tidy enough. But obviously, that's his first game. I think he needs to still bed into the club. So it is. Like I said, I think it's just a general frustration. But again, I know people listening to the podcast will be putting their head against the wall for about the fifth or sixth time I've said this. But yeah, the lack of a striker is feeling a bit evident at the moment, and I think the players on the pitch are starting to feel it as well. Especially if I think in some ways what we need to do in a game is probably score early, because then I think it allows the team to sort of settle down. Because to me, in the last couple of games, what I've noticed is we don't score early. It's a little bit similar to League One days, I suppose, except nowhere near as negative. I'd like to think where you don't score early, and then the players start to feel the effects of it, and then there's apprehension and tension start to build in the crowd. And I think you could definitely notice that sort of emotion second half from the fans in the stadium.
Yeah. Obviously, the second half as well. Obviously, Blackpool kind of grew into the game a little bit more, and somewhat an emphasis on somewhat came out of their shell and started trying to get the ball forward. And obviously had a couple of chances here and there that Patterson had to make a couple of saves for. But I think a lot of that, I want to say, confidence from Blackpool came from the frustration of the crowd, the atmosphere, the fact that Sunderland never really sustained the quality that we know they have in the final third, and Blackpool thought they could take advantage of that, and that's kind of when they started to go into the game a little bit.
Yeah, they did in there. And I think if you look at it, particularly there was at least one occasion from a set piece where I think Blackpool headed the ball. Patterson, I don't know whether the ball was kicked out of his hands from the set piece or whether he spilled it, but I think even something like that alone, you could definitely tell there was a bit of nervousness around the crowd. And I think that this is why I felt Blackpool going forward were better than Preston, because I thought Preston, all they did on Saturday was have one chance, I think, from Ched Evans, which was straight at Patterson, whereas Blackpool, I thought, looked a little bit more of a threat from set pieces, probably because they had like half of their players felt like they were 6'7", but nevertheless they did look more of a threat from set pieces. And again, as I've said before, when with that you start to then have the negative emotions start to build in the fans, which then feeds onto the pitch with the players. So I, like I said, I don't think Blackpool did enough to deserve the win, but there's no doubt in my mind I think they were the team that looked more likely to score in the second half. Although saying that, we had at least one good chance of our own towards the end, which I'm sure you want to get onto later.
Yeah, still a few things that obviously happened in the second half and chances, but I think the one thing that like kind of mentioned at the start, and it will bring us on to the next point I was going to make about the refereeing again. Obviously, there was the one decision that was kind of effectively the deciding factor, because if that decision gets given, it's a completely different result. It's a completely different game, and
I wonder which one you're referring to here.
100%. I don't think there'll be too much working out for that one, and we'll get onto that in a second. But overall, the general refereeing of the game was just shocking again. From the time waste and refereeing not really wanting to do anything about it. There were so many fouls that I think even Tony Mowbray said after the game that the referee just seemed to be guessing at. There was some in the first half that he was given for the slightest of touches. They then wouldn't give towards the latter stage of the half, and they wouldn't give it all in the second half. And again, one of the things that we talk about a lot in League One is just the consistency, and not just the consistency of the games that we've had in the Championship this season, but just from that 90 minutes, there was absolutely no consistency whatsoever.
It's starting to feel like that every time we say, "Oh, that was one of the worst refereeing performances," that a new referee has to come into the picture and say, "Hold my beer, and I'll try and match it." But yeah, I mean, I've said this so many times. I feel like a broken record in League One. I've said this constantly in League One and in the Championship. To be honest, it's hardly been any better. I feel to me like a lot of the referees love to make it all about themselves and love to try and do with the whole, "Oh, I'm not intimidated by the Stadium of Light atmosphere. I'm going to make sure that I stamp my authority on it," instead of just refereeing the game. And not just us, we've had decisions, Christ, over the last however many years that have been absolutely atrocious from referees. So it works both ways. But you're right. I just really, to be honest, I've got the point where I'm just bored of talking about the referees. But as I've said, they have to be criticised. And to be fair, Tony Mowbray even said himself, they need help, don't they? So
Yeah.
if they need help, then provide
They
some
need
bloody
something.
funding to give them help. Then
Yeah.
like I'm sick to death of referees being a conversation. But unfortunately, while they're this rubbish, it's going to be a fact. They are going to be the centre of attention.
Yeah. And I think they're too protected nowadays as well. Because if Mowbray said anything else in that press conference, which would not have been out of hand at all, and I think it would have been absolutely spot on and deserved, because anyone, even Blackpool fans, I think, were somewhat baffled at the fact that some of the decisions were given and some of them weren't. But if Mowbray said anything else on the matter, he'd have been fined, probably given a touchline ban. The club would have been fined. Referees are far too protected, especially in the AFL.
Yeah, and I'm not disputing for a second, by the way, that refereeing isn't a difficult job, because it is. Like, I mean, especially refereeing in front of a crowd of, what was it, 35,000 at the Stadium of Light. So it is difficult, don't get me wrong. But yeah, to an extent, they are protected too much, because even if referees came out and were allowed to come in, I know referees can't do this. I think apparently there's a regulation against them doing this. But, if they came out and said things like, oh, I got that wrong, fair enough, but that's why I did it, then I think fans will be a bit more lenient towards them and not so quick to hammer them. So in some ways, by protecting them, you're leaving them to hang out and dry even more, and eventually it'll lead to something worse down the line. So yeah, I agree with you. They're too protected, but at the end of the day, the standard of officiating has just simply got to improve, and that's not just for us. That's for every Championship, League One, League Two, whatever it is.
Even Premier League, I think, really.
Sorry.
Even in the Premier League, I think officiating
Well,
is
yeah,
at an
exactly. I
all-time
mean,
low.
that's even worse in some ways because they've got VAR. They've got even less of an excuse to get things wrong. But
yeah,
I mean, human error is natural. Don't get me wrong. I understand that. But eventually, if these consistently shite refereeing, sorry to swear, but if that continues, that could cost a team promotion. It could cost a team relegation. It could cost them missing out on the playoffs. So some big consequence will happen if this isn't improved.
Yeah, and obviously, John, the refereeing that we're talking about, and you're looking at the time wasting, the fouls that weren't given, and whatnot. It is bad refereeing, but it doesn't really have too much of an impact on the game or the result as a whole. But there obviously was one decision in the game that had a big impact in the end, because it was when Sunderland were obviously in the final third, just outside the edge of the box. I think it was Jack Clark that got fouled. Ball finds its way through to Embleton, and by the time Embleton's through on goal and actually ends up putting the ball in the back of the net, the referee has a yellow card out and has given the free kick. And I think a few people have looked at it and said it was the right decision. He'd already given the foul, and that's possibly why Embleton actually found himself through with so much space. But play the advantage. That's what referees get told.
Yeah, it's got to be massively play the advantage. It was it's just an awful decision. I still think that Embleton is through. Even with their players sort of maybe sort of stopping, but it's just an awful decision. But apart from that one, I don't think the referee was too bad. There's a lot of things that you see on the eye, like there was a double, what we thought was a foul. When Diallo went down, and then Roberts got smashed as well. But both of those to me looked fouls. And then obviously when they played it back, the referee was spot on. Diallo just sort of gives the ball up a bit easily, and then Roberts is tackled strongly but fairly. And those are the ones you could sort of go, yeah, okay, it could go either way, and called quite well. But this one, you just think, oh, what are you doing? Football is about entertainment, and obviously we play, to be fair, free flowing, good football. And even in an under 10s game that I manage week in, week out, even the referees there who are young kids themselves still know play the advantage, because there's nothing better than being through 1-on-1 with a goalkeeper than having a free kick. That advantage to me is 10 times better. And if the thing that annoyed me probably more than that actual decision is 5 minutes later, I can't remember who it was, but we smashed one of their players. I think it might have been Pritchard. The referee played the advantage. They carried on playing and then lost the ball, and then he pulled it back. And you do have to wonder, like, hang on a minute, mate. Where was that 5 minutes ago? You can't tell me that you've done that on the basis of what's just happened.
That's what I mean, because I think especially in the EFL, referees seem to learn as the game goes on, and then they'll kind of forget everything they learned for the next game. It was one of them ones where had he played that advantage for Embleton and he plays the advantage for the Blackpool player, then fair enough. But again, kind of like what we're going back to, I was saying to Michael, it's just the inconsistency. They'll do one thing, they'll be like, all right, well, I did that wrong. And then the next team, whoever we're playing or whether it happens to us and whatever way happens round, they'll do the complete opposite 5 minutes later.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know if, the Premier League is maybe on its own entity, when, someone will go through on goal, they don't know whether it's offside or there's a foul, they'll play on and play on and play on until, oh, no, we'll bring it back. So how come those top referees and those, people at the top, because it's the same organisation, I'm not saying as we go down, let it play, because you can always bring it back, book the player, give the free kick if nothing transpires. But a lot of the time, things do transpire because you're right near the goal. And if you find that one bit of quality, which is maybe the difference in us winning the game, we're probably not, half as downbeat as we are now, just on a stupid decision. And like I say, 5 minutes later, he does it correctly. So you're thinking, hang on a minute, what happened? How have you only just learned? Or you're so poor of a level that you've got no consistency. And I think consistency is what ultimately pisses everyone off.
It sounds like John's been waiting to let that out, and I loved hearing it. But he's right.
Everything he says is right, yeah.
It is. It's a joke. I mean, I'm sure there was a passage of play it was earlier in the game where one of our players committed a foul. Then I think Blackpool continued to have the ball for a couple of seconds in the second half, lost the ball, and then bearing in mind there was a good 4 or 5 seconds that was in between the initial foul was committed, and then pulled it back with a free kick. But because Blackpool lost the ball within about 5-6 seconds, he pulled it back with a free kick. So how can you do that, but then not have that, then not blow for a free kick, but then let the advantage go because we're in the box? Or is it that they're just scared to make that decision because if that results in a goal, then Blackpool are probably going to be livid about it and there's more spotlight on him?
Yeah. And I think especially with referees as well, they will always give the easy decisions, even if it's not a foul. I think there's so many times in the second half where we've kind of turned the ball and their defence is kind of running back towards their own goal, and Jack Clark might have been right behind their defender, might have literally touched his shoulder, their defender goes down, and it's such an easy free kick for the referee to give, but so many times, and probably 9 times out of 10, it's just never a foul. And if it was the other way around and it was Jack Clark who went down from a defender's touch, the referee wouldn't give it because it's in a dangerous position, John.
Yeah, they're the ones that you see, just week in, week out. And anytime one of our players goes near, sort of one of their defenders, you've just got to be please just don't touch him, because if he falls over, I can't remember who the guy at right back was, but he was brilliant at it, even though he was a horrible player. Any slight touch that would not, push you to the floor goes down, free kick. And they're the easy free kicks that are, given week in, week out. It's then the ones that are, there were quite a few fouls that the referee, did miss, and you're thinking, well, how have you given that one? Why is that any different to the one that we just had a minute ago? And you've played on. There were quite a few fouls, I think, over by, I can't remember, it was on Gooch or like in and around where Gooch's area was, and just weren't given. Yet, like you say, Jack Clark just sort of, can put his hands on a player, not necessarily push him, and bang, free kick. But I think that is,
it feels like our players have got to get their leg broken to get a decision, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, even when we do have a player get a leg broken, we don't even get the free kick.
No, we probably don't.
Dan Ballard is the one that comes to mind on that. But anyway, away from refereeing, because that wasn't the only reason for a 0-0 draw. And obviously that situation that we talked about with the free kick did end up just getting hit straight into the wall, very similar to the other 2 or 3 that we had in the game. There was one chance late on in the second half, last few minutes of the game, Michael, which I'm sure everyone's seen. I think it was Jewson Bennett, obviously came on and didn't quite have the impact that he has in other games. And again, I think that's down to the fact that kind of what we talked about a little bit earlier, where he's wanting to drift in the middle because there's no one else there. So he didn't have the width. Whenever he did have the width, he always had the beating of his fullback, and that's how this chance kind of came about. You put the ball in the box, Jack Clark wins the header, and an inch further to the corner, it's probably a goal, and we talk about a 1-0 win. But it's one of them things, fine margins, and ultimately it was a good save from the keeper.
Well, yeah, it feels like is this Jack Clark you're talking about?
Yeah.
Jack Clark's, yeah. Yeah, well, obviously, I'm in the southwest corner, the other end of the ground, and obviously we were going, yeah, oh, as in thinking that it actually had gone in, and And obviously, I just saw one of their players clear, and I was like, "Oh, that's just so typical." It feels like every time we come up against any goalkeeper, it feels like they always pull out their worldly saves against us and have last-minute blocks on the line, and it's just really irritating. But
Or score the last-minute diving header.
oh yeah, there's also that. Yeah, I wonder who you're referring to there. You're right, though. Yeah, it was irritating. I mean, obviously, if that goes in either side of the keeper, it's a different game. Maxwell obviously does do very well to react to it, to be fair, from close range. But yeah, I guess that's the two words are just fine margins, which that's what it seemed to be towards the end. And obviously, if that goes in, we're having a different conversation, aren't we?
Yeah. But obviously, it did finish 0-0, John, and that's obviously the second 0-0 draw, and I think third draw in a row, because I think what was Watford before the international break? I think it was, wasn't it? It's likely 3 draws in a row, if that is correct. But
Yes, you're
again,
right. Watford was the last game before the international break, yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. So that's 3 draws out of 3. And again, the kind of talking factor is the fact that we didn't have strikers. And for the next few games will be a very similar thing. We're not going to have Sims, we're not going to have Stewart. Obviously, the latter's a guarantee. Sims might be back sooner rather than later. But we have to be able to find a way on Saturday and in the next few games without them to put the ball in the back of the net, really.
Yeah, we do. I think Mowbray touched on it as well. I don't think it's a case of not creating the chances, because I think we did. Maybe it just didn't fall to us. I think maybe away from home we might be better suited with playing the sort of 5 sort of attacking midfielders. It seemed to be a little bit of an away performance. Like yesterday was, we seemed to Everton and Pritchard obviously up top were coming sort of very deep, and once we were working the ball up the pitch, it's almost a case of there was no one in the box. It was all the creators in and around, but not actually inside. So I think maybe against Swansea and playing away from home, they're going to want to keep the ball. I think ideally that suits us. And we can pick and choose our movements. Defensively, we are very, very sound. Those 2 up front yesterday were, in terms of stature and sort of size, they were a handful to deal with. But I thought we dealt with them, relatively well, albeit Patterson was quite, busy with their long throws and their, 1,000 corners that they had. But I think, just away from home, it might just be a different case of pick and choose your moments. And, at the moment, when we do get those opportunities, we do need to take them. I think second half yesterday was a little bit, maybe too many subs. I think it just sort of messed it around a little bit. Obviously, he mentioned Bennett and Michu in his post-match conference. He wasn't impressed with Bennett going inside. Wanted him to stay out wide and give us some width. And then also you had Michu, who was apparently, PSG are not going to be known for their, playing the ball backwards. So I don't know what Michu's doing, sort of turning away and recycling the ball. Maybe the crowd got, not criticism anyway, but maybe it got a little bit not on their backs, but made them a little bit more.
You could definitely sense the frustration. I think that's
Yeah.
kind of what the main thing was, because if Michu tries that forward pass and it doesn't come off, then the groans are going to be louder than if he actually does make the backward pass.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think it was still a bit of a mishmash, because then obviously at the back we were, Luke O'Nien had probably a lot of time on the, had a lot of the ball. So did Danny Barton. There's not really any. Obviously, there's no one to hit really. Then what you need is then your players sort of dropping in and receiving the ball, which is ideally what you want sort of Dan Neil in there for, dropping off and then turning and giving them, giving the balls, and then, picking out people like Pritchard. And once you bring Pritchard and Embleton in, really deep, then again, there's nothing up top, and their centre-backs will just sort of have sort of half a field day. Diallo up front was probably a bit of a disappointment, if I'm honest. I'm not obviously writing him off in any way, but I don't think it was his best game. But I just think at the moment we might just be suited to playing away from home, where without a striker, the onus isn't on us to go and attack. It's sit in and can we nick it?
Yeah, and I'm just looking there actually the fact that the most touches from a player for Sunderland was Luke O'Nien, and I think bar Pritchard, it was then Danny Bart and Elise. That's where you could really sense the fact that Sunderland did probably play the ball around the back kind of defensive line a little bit too much, especially during the last stages of the second half. But one other thing, just before we get into the player ratings, Michael, obviously that's been touched on a little bit on Twitter and whatnot, is Sunderland's home form compared to away form. And I think the easiest way to put your finger on it really is the fact that when Sunderland play away, obviously as a newly promoted team, against the likes of Sheffield United or Swansea or whoever it's going to be, when you're the away team, there's less expectation on you to take the game to your opponent. And Swansea at home on Saturday, they will be expected to probably dominate more of the possession. They will be expected to take the game to us, and that probably opens the chance up for us to hurt them offensively. We've got fast players, we've got direct players, Roberts, Clark, Bennett, Diallo, whoever else, and that probably suits Sunderland more because when we can break with pace, we can get bodies forward, and that's obviously where we've scored 5 goals away from home against 2 very good teams so far this season. Obviously, Reading third in the table, and I think Watford, I'm not sure where they are at the minute, but obviously they will be up there come the end of the season.
Watford are 8th, I think. Watford are 8th, but play tonight. So
yeah. They'll definitely be up there come the end of the season. And I think the difference when Sunderland are at home is the roles are flipped somewhat. Sunderland are expected to have more of the possession. Sunderland are expected to take the game to the opponent. And without a striker especially, it is a lot harder to do that.
Well, if you look at it just at home, again, it compares to League One, where the onus was on Sunderland to attack. And then the opposite, and especially if the opposition take the lead, frustration comes in. You can't break them down, and then everything just goes from there. But you're right, the home form, obviously, the home form definitely does need to improve. I'm looking at the home and away tables right now, and Sunderland have got 10 points so far on the road this season, as opposed to 7 points at the Stadium of Light, which it's not disastrous, but it's not particularly great. I mean, we've only lost 1 home game, but we've only won 1 home game. So, that needs to improve. But you're right, away from home, we're actually, I think, 5th in the league on away form, if you want to look at it that way. Obviously, there's, teams that have played a game less than us. In Rotherham's case, I think they've played a few games less than us away from home. But yeah, it's definitely one where Swansea on Saturday, for example, are not going to sit back the way Preston and Blackpool did at times in the last 2 games. They're going to probably be the ones to try and take the game to us a bit more. And I think Swansea, in some ways, probably need the victory because they're they're only a few 2 points behind us, so scratch that. But you know what I mean? Like, I think you're right. In some ways, Saturday may actually suit us a bit better, providing we're solid enough. If we obviously give away a couple of goals, then that's perceived advantage sort of goes away. But if they're throwing everything out at us and we're solid enough defensively, I think we saw there was one moment last night where we defended a set piece, we headed it out, and then I think it was either Clark or Michu, basically one pass. I think it was it might have been Diallo, whoever it was. There was one pass in the centre, through ball Clark, and straight away, even though nothing came of it, we broke very, very quickly. So away from home, you're right. I think that definitely will suit us, and especially considering that Swansea are going to be expected to have a lot of the ball, because I think Russell Martin teams tend to be quite possession heavy, don't they? So yeah, we'll wait and see.
Anyway, we'll get into play ratings. We'll try and get through these as quickly as possible compared to usual. And John will start with Patterson. Obviously had a couple of saves to make, and distribution was probably better last night as well.
Yeah, I'll probably go for 7. Like you say, all the saves he had to make were very, very solid. Distribution was decent. I was playing it easy. But yeah, I was quite impressed.
Yeah, Michael?
I think I probably goes one slightly harsher with the 6 because there was one moment, I think, from a corner that he didn't look particularly very assured, but across the whole, he did all right.
Yeah. Then in Gooch, obviously, once again at right wing back, John, a couple of times, probably down to no fault of his own, did get caught on the ball a little bit, but I think that was down to the fact there was very few options in front of him.
Yeah, I'll probably go for 6. A little bit frustrating. Won a few tackles, but gave the ball away a couple of times needlessly. But needs better options around him. I'd like to see him go forward a little bit more, sort of giving us balance if Elise sits sometimes. But that's the way it goes.
Yeah, Michael?
Yeah, 6 as well. I think that obviously, again, with the lack of options definitely was a factor, but there were a couple of times in our own area where Gooch was keeping hold of the ball a little bit too long, but I suppose both factors are to blame in that. But yeah, 6 did decent overall.
Yeah. Danny Bart, no, not Danny Bart, Luke O'Nien at the right side of defence, John.
Yeah, I'll probably go for 7. I thought it was typical Luco 9 performance. Decent on the ball. Tried to get us out as well. Second half, threw his body on the line. Countless times, just diving, putting his head in there everywhere. Really, really solid performance.
Yeah, Michael?
7 as well. Standard Luco 9 performance. About what we expect of him at this point.
Yeah. Obviously, Danny Bart alongside him, solid as ever. A couple of times similar to Gooch and similar to pretty much everyone else in defence, probably on the pitch as well, did get caught in possession and did look a little bit lost for ideas when he did have the ball. But other than that, defensively, thought he was solid again, John.
Yeah, I'll go for 7. Thought he was solid enough. For his size, I'd like to see him smash them 2 defenders out of the way and bury that header, but we can't have everything, can we?
And Michael.
7 as well, although it would have been higher, obviously, if he smashed those 2 defenders and scored, as John alluded to.
Yeah. Alongside him was obviously Adji Elise, who nearly scored one of the goals of the season. If you remember that one, kind of just McGeady spinned into the box with his first touch, and I think the keeper made a save from it. And again, kind of like he has in the last couple of games, ended up playing as a left winger or as a striker, as a centre forward, and a few people have suggested he could start the game there. And I don't think that many people would be against that. But as a defender, I thought he was very good again. John?
Yeah, I'll probably just about go over 7. I think he faded, especially second half a little bit. But first half, I thought he's everything that he's been so far this season. But yeah, get him up top and let's whip some balls into him.
Yeah. Michael?
7 as well, but play him on the wing because I think at this point you might as well put him as a winger because we've got probably enough defenders at the moment. Put Bailey right in the back and put him at the wing. But second half, I think one or two, maybe there was one occasion where he let the ball come into the box a little too easily. But on the whole, 7, solid enough defensively, and was still one of our better outlets going forward.
Yeah. Jack Clark on the left, John, got forward. Obviously, won a couple of free kicks here and there. Possibly could have pulled the trigger on a few occasions, but didn't.
I'll probably go over 6. A little bit frustrated when he was 1-on-1 with their defender. I thought, he's going to absolutely take him to the cleaners here, and didn't really, almost like didn't fancy himself. Probably unlucky with, another shot, and up top he probably still looked a little bit lost. So yeah, probably a little bit harsh, but yeah, I'll go for 6.
Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, I swear I'm not trying to copy John's ratings, but yeah, 6 as well. Seen him play for his standards this season. I've seen him play better, but did nothing particularly wrong. But obviously, first half should have scored. Second half probably could have made more of the counter-attacking chance he got, but he was up against a couple of defenders. But yeah, 6 for me. Just pretty bang average.
Yeah. Elliot Embleton in midfield, obviously, I say replacing Dan Neil, kind of played that role of Dan Neil with Ahmad coming in for him, but it was him that played in his position, John.
I'd probably go for 6. He's probably, maybe not through any fault of his own, but he's not really impressing me last sort of 2 games. Obviously, when he came in at Reading, it was perfect game for him. But yeah, at the moment, it's just not from me anyway. I don't think he did too much. I'd probably like to see him step up on Pritchard when Pritchard's getting a free kick. If he missed the first one, don't care how good you are. Let's give someone else a turn.
Yeah, Michael.
I'd probably go slightly higher with the 7. I thought he was unlucky not to score in the first half when his curling shot hit the bar. And I think second half, obviously, he should. Really, if the referee was competent, he would have had a goal to his name. But obviously, it didn't count, did it? So I thought at times he tried to link up, play pretty well. But yeah, I mean, he's certainly through no fault of his own. He was just kind of looking a bit lost as the game wore on.
Yeah. Corey Evans, John.
I'll probably go over 7. I thought he was solid. Seemed to be popping up out of nowhere and winning the ball back. Kept us ticking over. Yeah, sort of a standard Corey Evans performance, really.
Yeah, Michael.
7 as well. I can't put more on what John said. Just standard Corey Evans performance.
Yeah. In front of him, obviously Alex Pritchard once again, John.
I'll probably get pelters here, but I thought he was quite poor. I'll probably go over 5. 3 free kicks and not hitting the target. That's a massive frustration. I think he's a little bit frustrated with himself at the minute. And you can tell that sometimes linked up the play here and there, but a player of his quality, which is what I'm judging him on. I don't think he's been at the races the last 2 games.
Yeah, that's fair, Michael.
Well, if John gets pelters, I'll get pelters with them. So yeah, I think I'd say 5 as well. I think for Pritchard's standards, especially, I think he's capable of more. But again, as I said earlier in the podcast, he knows that himself, and I think he'll be disappointed with this performance as much as anyone.
Yeah. Patrick Roberts again does what he usually did, what he usually does. There we go. Got on the ball, tried to get forward with it, but again, just that kind of final third decision making wasn't quite there, John.
Yeah, I'll probably go for 6. Obviously, tried everything, and I think Gooch probably doesn't go, too much, so that Patrick Roberts does have that space, to play in and try and get one-on-one. But like you say, decision making at the end, just not that he's really got anyone to hit, and they were doubling up on him. And to be fair, because they had the players too. So yeah, again, a little bit of a frustrating one.
Yeah, Michael.
I'd go with a 7. I thought Petros was our best attacking outlet going forward. I say attacking outlet. He was one of our better attackers going forward. I felt that he was skinning a couple of people at times. I think there was one occasion where in the second half where I think 1 or 2 players tried to double up on him. He still managed to get past them. And it was just like we said earlier with Gooch defensively. I think if Patrick Roberts had the options around him, I think we would have been talking. I think he would have had an option to play a pass. So yeah, I'd say 7. I thought Roberts was one of our better players personally.
Yeah, and last but not least, Ahmad, who obviously started his first game since joining on loan. And like we said right at the start, I think when he was picking the ball up and driving at players, he looked good. Decision making again, similar to a few players, wasn't quite there. And obviously, I'm still thinking about that shot that was never actually a shot, which was very frustrating. But overall, John?
Yeah, all round, I'd probably go over 5. He tries to take too many touches in the box, whereas he skins his man, and then you've got to hit the target then. But he tries to be clever again, and almost sort of gives up even trying to chase the ball back. And sometimes he dropped in and held the ball up, but other times he was just sort of shrugged off the ball, and it was just sort of okay. It was just a little bit frustrating for me watching.
Yeah, and Michael last.
Probably 6 for me. I think at times he looked tidy, but again, the biggest criticism is obviously there's times when if he gets into the box, he needs to start practicing having a shot here because, as John said, the first half chance where he's going down the byline, if he has a shot, good chance he scores, but obviously tries to be too clever and the chance is lost. But 6 did nothing particularly wrong, but should have done better with the chance he had.
Yeah. Very quickly, man of the match, John.
I'd probably go Luke 09 on the whole. Probably doing a few players a disservice, but just all round 90 minutes. I thought he was solid. To be fair.
Yeah, and Michael for you.
I was debating between Elise and Roberts actually. This might sound stupid considering we didn't score, but I'd go with Roberts. I thought that every time he was trying to get on the ball, I felt most confident something would actually happen. And if it weren't for better options around him, I think something would have happened.
Yeah, that is fair. But like we said, Saturday is Swansea away, and after 2 somewhat disappointing results, I think a win is probably needed. I think in a normal situation, I think many people would take a point, myself included, in that. But I think after 2 draws, especially at home against 2 teams that, well, Preston is somewhat of a respectable point. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but I think it's definitely.
It would have been had we beaten Blackpool, I think.
Yeah, but I think the draw against Blackpool was definitely a disappointing result. So I think the pressure is somewhat on Sunderland to go to Swansea, take the game to them, and get the win. But if we had to go with a prediction for that game, John, what would it be?
Again, I'd happily take a win. But I think with this one, maybe I'll go for a score draw. I'd probably take a point. Because that probably is a decent point at their place. But I'd like to see us at least score. So I'll probably go 1-1 or 2-2. But I'll happily take a win.
Happily, Michael.
Sure, we'd all happily take a win, wouldn't we? I think I've got a feeling we might nick this one. I'm going to go 2-1 us, just because I think with Swansea coming at us, they're going to come at us a lot more. And I think providing we stand up to the challenge enough, they will leave gaps on the break. I mean, I think apparently Swansea. I'll quickly look at the table and try and stall here for a second. I think they've let in 14 goals, so I think we can overall probably get at them a bit more. And if they leave gaps, I think we've got the place to exploit it. So I'm going to go with an optimistic 2-1 Sunderland. But to be fair, in isolation, a point here I don't think is a bad result. But yeah, I think we do need to get a win.
Yeah. Who's scoring, Michael?
Who's scoring? Right, okay then. Elise from a header and Bar. I'm going to go Bar to open this account. We'll go something really adventurous that will probably be wrong come 5 o'clock Saturday.
Quite possibly. Interesting to see who does start for Sunderland, whether Bar does get a start. Obviously, Jason Bennett yet to start the game. Obviously, Michu making an appearance off the bench. I don't think he's going to be starting any games anytime soon. But of course, plenty of games to be played between now and the World Cup. So who knows what will happen. But as always, after that Swansea game, and hopefully after a win, we'll be back to talk about that game in depth and probably have a go at the referees for something, whatnot. I'm sure we'll find something.
It wouldn't be a podcast without having to go at the referees, would it?
No, and I'm pretty sure every EFL podcast will follow a very similar structure to that, where referees will get at least one mention per game. Usually, they're going to be off days, but
Stop being shit. We'll stop mentioning you.
yeah, that's the deal. 100%.
Basically.
Get it in the contract. But like I say, we'll be back to talk about that Swansea game, which will be out on Sunday. But until then, we will see you later.
That's all, folks.